children, welcome back, and in this video we'll be starting chapter 5 of macroeconomics, government budget and the economy. And let's see what are the important topics that you should revise for the exam. Okay, the first topic is government budget. So let's try to define this first. So it is an estimate of government revenue and expenditure during a given year. So basically, as you know, we are also human beings, we are consumers, we earn money to spend. In the same way, government also earn, that is called revenue. The income of the government is called revenue, and it also spends a lot of money on the public welfare activities. So government budget is just a statement. It is a pre-plan of the government, that how it will earn revenue and how it is going to spend that money on the public. Okay, and generally this government budget is prepared for 1 year, for 1 year, that is 1st April to 31st March every year. So these things you can write in its definition. Now let's move on to the objectives of government budget. So why the government prepares budget? What is the main motive of the government behind preparing the budget? So the first one is a reallocation of resources. So firstly, you should know what is allocation. Allocation means distribution of resources among the different sectors of an economy. So reallocation, that means again the resources are redistributed among the people, among the different sectors of an economy. So just I am reading out what I have written here. The most important object of the government budget is to reallocate the resources properly so that maximum social welfare can be achieved. And the government provides public goods such as the defense of the country, roads, sanitation, etc. for the welfare of the public. So all these things, whatever the revenue that the government has, that is distributed according to the priority. Okay, let's move on to the second point of the objective of government budget, that is redistribution of the wealth. So whatever the wealth is there in the economy, the resources, the revenue, so the government always wants to distribute this wealth among all the people equally, so that social inequality can be reduced and the gap between the rich and poor can be minimized. So these sentences you can write to define this point. Let's move on to the third objective of government budget, economic stability. Now this is very important for any economy, that an economy should be stable in terms of its economic performance. So the object of the government budget is to control the economic fluctuations. Now what are these fluctuations? There may be fluctuations in the price level, like inflation and deflation. There may be fluctuation in the bank rates, loan rates. There may be fluctuations in the balance of payment. So all these things need to be stabilized, and to stabilize all these economic components, a government prepare budget so that the economic system of the country will be stable. The fourth objective is economic growth. This is a very simple topic, as we know that the rise in the national income of a country is known as economic growth, and every government wants to achieve economic growth and development for its country, and therefore it prepares budgets so as to increase the growth and development of the country. So it's quite obvious that every government wants its country to develop economically. The people should earn more, the people should have a better standard of living, so like that. So all these things you can mention. Okay, then we have this next object, reducing regional inequalities. Now there are many areas in our country which are not well developed due to lack of resources, infrastructure, education and health facilities, and therefore the object of the government is to develop these underdeveloped areas by providing more facilities to the people living in these states. So, as for example, say Nagaland and Gujarat. So, Gujarat is much more developed than Nagaland, and there are reasons behind that, because there are not good infrastructure facilities, the education standards, the health facilities, the natural resources, like there are a lot of forest, hilly areas. So they are, Nagaland is far behind that, and Gujarat is a well developed state. So the government needs to balance the growth. The government also wants Nagaland or Manipur or Mizoram or Odisha to develop equally as Maharashtra or Gujarat or Punjab. So, like that. So, this is to reduce regional inequalities, and sixthly, employment opportunities. The government wants to provide employment opportunities to the people, and it is very important for a country like India, where there is a problem of unemployment, and to reduce this unemployment problem, always the government prepares a budget accordingly. Okay, now let's move on to the different components of government budget. Okay, before we move on, first let's try to find out the different components from this figure. As you can see here on the screen, the government budget has two main components. That is, the first one is revenue budget, the other is capital budget. So these are the two main components. Again, revenue budget is divided into two parts. One is revenue receipt, the other is revenue expenditure. And again, in the same way, capital budget is divided into two parts: capital receipts and capital expenditure. Now again, we can divide this, like revenue receipts can be divided into tax revenue and non-tax revenue. Similarly, revenue expenditure can be planned revenue expenditure or non-planned revenue expenditure. And similarly, we can divide capital expenditure into two main parts: planned capital expenditure and non-planned capital expenditure. So these are the main components. So revenue budget and capital budgets, these are the two main categories of the components of government budget. So let's try to find out what is this revenue budget. I have written here the definition of this. It is an estimate of revenue receipts and revenue expenditure of the government during a given year. So as we know that revenue means the income of the government, and here the income and the expenditure. So this is just an estimate, it is just a plan, it is just an anticipation that how the revenue receipts will come from what sources, and how it is going to be spent on the people. And again, these are divided into two parts. Just now I told you from the flow chart that revenue budget can be revenue receipts and revenue expenditure. Okay, now see what is this revenue receipts. All those receipts of the government which neither create any liability nor reduce financial assets are termed as revenue receipts. You must learn this definition. This is very important for your exam, that all the different types of receipts that the government receive, which neither create any liability for the government, any claim for the government, and nor it reduces the financial assets of the government. So these receipts are generally termed as revenue receipts, and these are non-redeemable. I mean, these are not to be paid back by the government. Like the government doesn't have any liability to pay these receipts, and basically these receipts are routinious in nature. They are ordinarily received by the government, and regularly these receipts are received by the government, and every government receives these receipts for the smooth working of the economy. And again, revenue receipts can be of two types, as you can see here. One is tax revenue, the other is non-tax revenue. So from these two sources, the government receives revenue receipts. As we know, the government collects taxes, and that is called tax revenue. Let's try to find out the meaning of this. It refers to the total receipts from taxes and duties imposed by the government. And tax can be defined as a compulsory payment made by people to the government. So this line is the definition of tax, and this is the most important source of the revenue of the government. The important taxes which are collected by the government can be, these are all examples: income tax, corporation tax, interest tax, property tax. There are a lot of different types of taxes, and these are all revenue receipts of the company. And again, these tax revenues can be of two types. One is a direct tax, the other is indirect tax. I have written here the difference between these two types of taxes in the box. Direct taxes, these are directly borne by the payer himself, and these are generally progressive in nature. That means it increases with the increase in income. More the income, more will be the direct taxes. For example, income tax. So we pay income tax on the basis of our income. So if we earn more, we have to pay more income tax. So these are called progressive tax or direct taxes. Similarly, indirect taxes generally are distributed among various individuals, and these are proportional in nature or proportional tax. That means these tax rates remain constant whether the income is increased or decreased. It doesn't make any difference. Like for example, sales tax, GST. So these are paid by almost all the people of the country who consume goods and services. So we just can't escape this tax. So these are indirect taxes, right? Now let's move on to non-tax revenue. There are some sources which are non-tax revenue. Now it refers to the total receipts of the government from all sources other than tax receipts. And non-tax revenue sources include interest on loans by the central government, dividends and profits or on the investment made by the government, fees for service rendered by the government, license fee, fines, penalties, foreign aid from the government. So these are a part of non-tax revenue, where these are not directly imposed on the people of the country. These are the revenue, the income of the government itself. So these examples you must learn for the exam. The next one is capital receipt. Now let's see what are those. The definition here written: all those receipts of the government which create liability or reduce financial assets are termed as capital receipts. So just a difference of not in both the definition of revenue receipt and capital receipt. And capital receipts, they create liability for the government and also reduces the financial assets of the government. And when government takes loans, these loans will have to be returned along with the interest. Sometimes the government also takes loans from RBI or from the foreign banks. So the government has to pay taxes for that, interest for that. So it creates a liability for the government. And sometimes a government sells its assets to various people or foreign individuals. So that means the earning from the asset will disappear. So thus these receipts can be debt creating and non-debt creating receipts. So the major sources of capital receipts include the first one, recovery of loans from states, union territories, etc. As we know, there are so many states in our country, and sometimes the state takes loan from the government. So the states and union territories have to pay back the loan of the government, including the interest. So that is capital receipts. Loans taken from public or RBI or from foreign countries or from international banks. So they are also capital receipts. Amount received from disinvestment, that means when any public sector enterprises is given to the private individuals, so the amount that is received from those private individuals, so that is called disinvestment amount. So these are also a part of capital receipts. So do learn these examples. These are very important for your exam. Okay. Now this is the difference between revenue receipt and capital receipt. It's very simple one. In the first difference, you can write the meaning of both these things, and then its main important features, like revenue receipts are routine, ordinary and usual in nature, whereas capital receipts are regular and non-recurring. And revenue receipts, they do not create any future obligation for the government, whereas these create future obligation for the government. So like that. Okay, now we have talked about the receipts. Let's talk about the expenditure part of the government. So these are again two types, revenue and capital expenditure. Let's see what is this revenue expenditure. It refers to the expenditure which neither creates any asset nor reduces any liability of the government. And these are incurred for the normal functioning of the government departments. For example, interest payment on the debts taken by the government, grants given to the state government, etc. And these revenue expenditures can be again classified into plan and non-plan expenditure. So basically revenue expenditure is made for the normal functioning of the government. गवर्नमेंट के बहुत सारे डिपार्टमेंट्स हैं, ऑफिसेस हैं, डिफेंस है, तो उनको मेंटेन करने के लिए जो खर्चा करती है गवर्नमेंट, सो दैट इज़ कॉल्ड रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर. ओके, बहुत सिंपल है. एंड प्लान एंड नॉन प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर, लेट्स ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड द मीनिंग ऑफ दिस. प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर्स आर प्री प्लान्ड ड्यूरिंग द 5-year प्लान्स. हम लोग जानते हैं कि इंडियन गवर्नमेंट 5-year प्लान्स तैयार करती है. दीज आर जनरली लॉन्ग टर्म प्लान्स एंड 5 साल के लिए प्लानिंग होती है, 1 साल के लिए भी प्लानिंग होती है, तो बहुत सारी प्लानिंग होती है. तो दे आर ऑल द एक्सपेंडिचर्स विच आर मेंशन्ड इन दिस 5-year प्लान्स आर कॉल्ड प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर. एंड नॉन प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर की बात करते हैं. दीज आर नॉट इंक्लूडेड इन 5-year प्लान्स. प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर आर जनरली फिक्स्ड and they do not change with time, but non-plan expenditure, these are variable in nature and they changes according to the situations. Plan expenditure help in the economic development of the country, whereas non-plan expenditure, they are non-developmental in nature, right? जैसे कि गवर्नमेंट डिपार्टमेंट्स के जो मेंटेनेंस का जो खर्चा होता है, जो डेली खर्चा जो होता है रेगुलर, तो दैट इज़ नॉन प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर. एंड यहाँ पे मैंने कुछ एग्जांपल्स दिए हैं प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर के, लाइक एक्सपेंडिचर ऑन इलेक्ट्रिसिटी जनरेशन, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, एजुकेशन, हेल्थ केयर पे खर्चा. तो ये सारे खर्चे होते हैं प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर. गवर्नमेंट पहले से ही प्लान करती है कि मेरे को इतना इतना खर्चा करना है. एंड जो नॉन प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर के अंदर जो डिफेंस सर्विसेज को मेंटेनेंस है, सब्सिडीज प्रोवाइड करना, सैलरीज पेमेंट करना, पेंशन्स पेमेंट करना, सो दीज आर ऑल नॉन प्लान एक्सपेंडिचर. सो लाइक दैट. ओके, एक और एक्सपेंडिचर है कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर, एंड दीज आर रिजल्ट इन द क्रिएशन ऑफ फिजिकल और फाइनेंशियल एसेट्स और रिडक्शन इन द फाइनेंशियल लायबिलिटीज. So this includes expenditure on the acquisition of land, building, machinery. तो जो भी खर्चा है जो लॉन्ग टर्म नेचर के लिए गवर्नमेंट खर्चा करती है, आई मीन फॉर फिक्स्ड एसेट्स जनरली, जैसे लैंड, बिल्डिंग, मशीनरी, दीज आर ऑल फिक्स्ड एसेट्स. तो इनको हम कैपिटल गुड्स भी बोलते हैं, है ना. तो इन सब गुड्स को परचेज करने के लिए जो गवर्नमेंट खर्चा करती है, दैट इज कॉल्ड कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर. सो इट इज़ सो सिंपल. And again these are divided into two parts, plan and non-plan capital expenditure. So plan expenditure, basically it relates to the assistance given to the state and union territory, and non-plan expenditure, they cover all general social and economic services provided to the government. Okay children, one difference that you can work out for the exam between revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. ये question भी बहुत बार exams में आता है. So revenue expenditure, these are incurred for the normal functioning of the government, whereas capital expenditure are done to acquire fixed assets. So that's very simple. Revenue expenditures are generally short, like they are incurred in the short run, right? And capital expenditure, they are incurred for long term. And revenue expenditures does not create any assets, whereas capital expenditures, they create assets like fixed assets. And then lastly, you can give examples of revenue expenditure as salaries, interest, subsidies paid and all that. And capital expenditure, loans given to the different states and union territories, and purchasing of fixed assets like machines, land, building and like that. So my dear friends, these are few important questions up to this, different components of government budget. And in the next video I'll be telling you the different types of government budget and the solutions of NCERT book. So till then, watch this video carefully and try to revise the lessons, try to learn the lessons, write as many times as possible the answers, and a very best of luck for your preparation and